So how would a typical day at work start for you?
I'd go to the shop and pick up the truck. I would go to the boss and get a start. And the start is it's a piece of paper that tells you about the house you're about to do. And it goes through the options on it. Because when people go to buy a house, they get ceiling fans, recessed cans, TV here, TV there. And that start goes through the locations of all those. So I would pick that up from the boss, get the start. It has a lot number on it. Load the truck up, make sure I had boxes, make sure I had wire, make sure I had the drill, all the tools I need to cut wood with. Make sure that my helper's there, of course, because you can't leave without your helper. It goes a lot faster when you have two people wiring it. So pick that up, get the blueprint, matches the start, drive the truck to the job site. When I get to the job site, I start laying out the house, go through the blueprint. I would read the start first completely, even if there's stuff that wasn't necessarily pertaining to my trade. I'd read through it anyways just to make sure I didn't forget anything. Sometimes they put stuff in other sections, like plumbing section. For a soft water loop, we'd have to have an outlet there.
So it's possible that like the plumbing or other areas could affect where you're going to put specific electrical stuff?
Yes. So I'd read through the whole start, get the blueprint, and I'd lay the house out with a lumber crown, mark it on the floor where the outlets would go, mark it on the stud right above the floor marking at a certain height. Usually outlets go at 16 to the top of the box, and then switches would go at 46 to the top of the box. Yeah. So you want to mark it on the ground so you don't miss measuring it and marking it on the stud. Because it's harder to see a little line on a stud. So if you look at the ground, you know there's something there. Yeah, sometimes if you go to replace your carpet in your house or your tile, you'll rip the floor up and you'll see like a circle with two lines going through it. That's an outlet. Somebody went through there and marked that. You'd also mark out the lights, like the distance off the walls where the light would go. So when you go to hang the light, you don't have to go down there and measure it. You could just get on the ladder and measure it up there because you're looking at the measurement on the ground. Ceiling fans and lights in a bedroom, they have to be centered. So if they're not centered, you have to cut wood for it and make it center. You want to hang your recessed cans. That all goes up when you're boxing the house. So you lay it out, you box the house. That's when you do your circuits. Start at the end of the house, count 13 devices, openings, outlets. You count 13 towards the panel, and then that's where you would mark on the ground your first home run. Your home run is the wire that goes from that box to the panel. Usually a typical 1,500 square foot house, it'll have 5 lighting circuits. You'll have an air handler home run. You'll have 7 20 amp home runs, and you'll have the AC and the range.
When you're marking out the home run, you're talking about from the outlet or the device all the way back to the box, right?
Yeah, so let's say you're working in the master bedroom, and usually, not all the time, but usually that's the farthest room from the front of the house. So let's say you're working in there, and you would want to count 13 outlets in that room, and then the outlet that's closest to the panel, that's number 13, you'd put your home run in that box. So that would be the start of that circuit.
So you would start the wire at the outlet that's closest to the box?
That's closest to the panel.
Oh, I'm sorry, the panel. And then you would run it to the next one and the next one and kind of make a loop?
Yeah, all those 13 that you just counted, you want to connect them like connect the dots. Kind of.
And those are going to be all in the same circuit,
all
right?
All in the same circuit.
Okay, gotcha.
And there's codes too that pertain to how you circuit a house. Like your bathroom outlets, they would all be on one circuit, separate from any lighting circuit, separate from any other outlets. That's because they have to be GFI protected. Those are the outlets with the test and reset buttons.
I always wondered what made the difference between those, but it sounds like it's primarily if they're around water, so like kitchen and bathroom and stuff.
Anything that's within 6 feet of water, or basically anywhere where you can reach an outlet and stick your hand in water, then that has to be GFI protected. So your bathrooms, every outlet in your garage, even the garage door opener, that's a weird one because are you ever going to be standing in water and plugging your garage door opener in?
Yeah, I doubt it.
No. So that's a new code too, by the way.
Really? That's interesting. How do you know when they come out with new codes and stuff?
Every 3 years, The NEC, National Electrical Code, they put out a book called the Code Book. Basically, you have to pay attention to that. It gives you updates on the new codes. Like I can tell you right now that there's new codes that are coming into effect, like you have to have a GFI on your refrigerator now in the kitchen. That's one that's going to be coming into effect pretty soon here.
And is that all across like the country, or is that state or city?
National.
Oh, it is national. Wow. So basically, you'll start at whatever outlet or device is furthest, and then you'll connect the dots all the way back to the panel.
Yeah, you want to keep them like in groups so you can label them real easy. Like if there's outlets and switches in a master bedroom, you just kind of want to stay with that. So you can just label the panel master bedroom, and that'll be a breaker. You don't want to be like master bedroom, living room, kitchen, because you can group them differently to make that happen, where it's master bedroom would be a circuit, your kitchen lights would be a different circuit. You just don't want to jump around like that. It's just way easier to label, and it's way easier to hot check.
Is there any rules as far as like, you know, if it's a specific, like the master bedroom has to just be the master bedroom, or you can kind of do it any way you want? It's just more confusing.
Yeah, you can do it any way you want. You just don't want to exceed 13 outlets or 13 openings or 13 devices, 13 lights. So if you're counting a light switch, like you have a fan, you have 2 switches for that fan, you would count that as 2 instead of 1.
Okay, so it would be a fan and it has an outlet on it, so it's 2.
A fan, light, and then the fan motor.
Oh, okay.
So any fans with like a light kit, or let's say you have one switch that controls 6 recess cans, you would count that as 6 because there's 6 devices on it.
Oh, that's interesting. So 6 lights in the ceiling would be 6 devices. That's interesting.
Yeah, it keeps the circuits from getting overloaded. Your bathrooms are on their own circuit. Your lighting is on a separate circuit. Then you have kitchen. You have 2 small appliance circuits in your kitchen that serve the countertops. It doesn't matter if you got 2 outlets in your kitchen or 4 outlets. You still have to have 2 different circuits for those outlets. So if you had 4, you just split them up 2 and 2. So you'd have 2 GFIs in your kitchen. Your disposal is always dedicated. So it's going to be a home run from that outlet to the panel. Your refrigerator is always dedicated. Your microwave is always dedicated. Your washer is dedicated.
So you just kind of know from experience what has to be on its own circuit and what can be grouped with other components.
This is why it takes about 6 to 8 months to learn all this.
So now what's the deal with the 110 volt versus the 220 volt outlets that you would find on like your dryer or some other big appliances in your house?
There's a big difference, 110 and 220. When the utility company brings power to your house, they bring in 2 hot wires, 110 volt on each hot wire. So that's where I get the 220 from. The way the panels are set up, every other breaker is the same phase. So every other breaker, as you're counting down top to bottom, that's going to be 110 on one of those wires that are brought in. And the opposite, every other breaker is another 110 on the other side. The utility company, they always hook up their own power. The only time we ever have to go into that side, the meter side of the panel, is when we do overhead feeds. When it's not an underground feed, then we have to put a mast on the panel. It's got to go through the eave, and we have to brace it, put a weather head on it, and run wires through it. And then the utility company comes back and pulls wires from the power line. They'll pull their wires, tap into that, and then they'll bring it to the house and tap into what we put in. Other than that, when it's underground, we don't hook anything up to that meter.
So after you've kind of laid out all your wires, like you know what circuits you're going to run and where all the wires are going to go and everything, what do you do typically after that?
So after we wire it up, we make it up. And that's stripping the wires off, the Romex off the wires, the plastic sheathing. We strip that off with a razor knife. We have to do the makeup, and the makeup would be, all the outlets have to be grounded. So you would take the 2 ground wires or 3 ground wires, however many wires you have in your outlet box. You take all the grounds, cut them the same length, and put 1 pigtail on it. And the pigtail is what hooks up to the actual outlet when they trim it out. So that'll hook up as the ground. Then you'll have white wires, black wires, and maybe red wires still in there. Cut everything the same length, rolled up, and push it in the box. And you do this because when they come back with drywall and put the drywall up, they don't usually cut out the boxes beforehand. They'll just slap the drywall up and go back with a roto zip and zip out that hole where the box is. They're pretty accurate too, but with that being said, if your wires aren't tucked back in the box, they will zip right through them.
You have to wire from the device to the switch and then from the switch to the breakers, or?
So the switch, when you're playing connect the dots, that switch is one of the dots basically. Let's say there's outlets on either side, you go outlet to switch to outlet. And then you go back to the outlet and pull your wire from your switch up to your light, because you have to connect to the light. We call that the switch leg. Then there's also 3 ways, like 2 switches that'll control the same light, like in a hallway on different ends.
Yes.
So for that, you would run the 14-3 wire, and that goes from switch to switch. So just a quick rundown on the wire size. So you got 14-2 wire. The 14 deals with how big the wire is, and the 2 means there's 2 wires in there, white and black. We don't count the ground because the ground comes in all of them. So 14-3 wire would be the size of the wires, 14 gauge. 3 meaning it's got a white, a black, and a red. Same thing with 12 wire, that's the size. 12 is the size. You'd have 12-2, 12-3, and 12 wire is going to be bigger than 14 wire. So 14 wires for 15 amp circuits, 12 wires for 20 amp circuits.
So now, how long does it take you to typically wire up a whole house like that from start to finish?
A 1,500 square foot house, it should only take about 2.5 days at the most. There's a lot of work to do in it, but if you got a good helper, then you'll blow right through it. So after you make it up and everything's stuffed in the box, you want to go back and you have to fill in the holes, only the ones going up or between the floors. So you'd use insulation, caulking, grade stuff, fire caulking. We call it stuffing holes. So anywhere you drilled up, you have to stuff the hole. And then you have to go back with nail plates, and those protect the wires from drywall. So if you did not drill in the center of a 2x4 stud, exactly in the center, if it's closer to one side or the other, you have to nail plate that side. Because the drywallers, they'll use like 3/4 inch screws, and you figure 1/2 inch drywall or 5/8 drywall, that screw is going to go into that wire once it gets into the drywall. So you put the nail plate there to protect it from that.
So now you mentioned the drilling process, which is basically, with no drywall in the house, you're drilling holes through the studs that are basically the walls, and you're just making holes for the wires to go like to the next floor or to another room or something. How long does that process take to drill all the holes that you need?
Drilling the house should only take like 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
As far as the helper goes, would that be like a position that somebody could get without any real experience?
Yeah.
They could kind of apply and they would help you and learn from you and, just get experience?
Yep, exactly.
And is it always typically like that, where it's a 2-person job? There's usually an experienced person like yourself and then a helper that's not as experienced?
Yes. Sometimes there's helpers that are experienced too. I mean, that you progress to that point. Most of the time when you're a helper and you've been with the guy for a while and you know what you're doing, you just want to get away from him anyways because you're sick of getting bossed around. If you got a good lead man or a foreman and he teaches you real good and it's a good relationship, then it's kind of fun to go into work, But if you got one that's not so good, then he'll makes you do like a lot of the stuff that he doesn't want to do. But it's all learning. You're gonna learn. If you ever get in that situation, just do what he says, and eventually he'll see you're doing it and you're doing it fast, and he'll teach you something else.